This is the Franchise QB Podcast, where we empower entrepreneurs to win big in franchising. We huddle up weekly to educate our audience about the most successful small business model ever created, franchising.
Welcome to the Franchise QB Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Halpern, a 20-year industry veteran and entrepreneur. My mission is for listeners to achieve their American dreams of creating wealth and independence through franchise ownership. Every week, we speak with franchisees, franchisors, or vendors that support the industry. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started. Joining us on the huddle today is Kit Higgs, franchise attorney and owner of Kit Franchise Law. Welcome to the show, Kit.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good to see you again. So let's talk a little bit about your background. You've been practicing law since 2006, and this is interesting. You served as an assistant prosecutor for Hamilton County in the Cincinnati area in Family Law and Children's Services Division, which is charged with protecting children from abuse, neglect, and other dangerous situations. While a prosecutor, you handled more than 100 case files and litigated dozens in both child abuse and juvenile delinquency. Then you kind of switched gears, and I'm interested to talk to you about that. And you moved into franchising, which is how we connected. You were in-house counsel for a franchise development firm that grew small concepts into nationally recognized brands. You then served as general counsel for CycleBar, a boutique fitness studio franchise that awarded over 200 studios in their first year after launching. And you're an active member of the American Bar Association and the International Franchise Association, or IFA. So really great credentials. Tell us a little bit about your experience going way back to '06 as a prosecutor in Cincinnati. And then I'd love to hear how you kind of shifted gears and pivoted into franchise law.
Yeah, great question. And again, thank you for having me. So I graduated law school. I worked in politics for a little bit and then worked at the prosecutor's office. But I was there and I was working in the juvenile delinquency section and child abuse section and prosecuting cases on the civil side. That is, if there was an allegation of abuse, we have the criminal prosecutors that would come in and prosecute them for those actions. And then they've got to figure out what you're going to do with the children. So that's when the civil side comes in. So I was prosecuting a bunch of cases and figuring out where children should go. The number one place is back to the parents if they're not abusive, and then to aunts and uncles, et cetera. Anyway, I was doing that job when I got a phone call in court from a good friend, Todd Kirby, who was running this company called St. Gregory Development Group. And he said, called me 3 times in a row. I thought it was an emergency because if you know Todd, sometimes he gets in a little trouble. And so I called him back and I said, hey, what's going on? I'm in the middle of trial. He said, hey, I want to hire you to work with us in legal compliance. We've got this great franchise sales organization. We're selling tons of brands. Come join us. And I thought about it for a second. I said, no, I don't know anything about franchise law, and I loved having the badge and I loved doing what I was doing. You make very little money, though, doing that as a prosecutor. And unfortunately, with law school bills and all of that, said eventually, you know what, Kirby, I'll take you up on that offer. And so I joined St. Gregory Development Group as assistant general counsel, and I was helping in their legal compliance department, making sure that all of those sales guys were following all the FTC rules and regulations on franchise sales. So I really learned franchise sales law from working with these guys because they were selling tons of brands. I mean, CycleBar. Well, this is before CycleBar. Sorry, Club Pilates. I think their biggest claim to fame at that time was Title Boxing Club.
Okay, huge brands. I mean, Club Pilates sold out nationwide.
And then Club Pilates, CycleBar, Pet Supplies Plus. We had, I think, during my time at St. Gregory, I think we represented maybe 40 brands and sold, thousands of units. So really got to understand the franchise sales side.
So at what point in your career did you say, hey, I'm going to start my own firm and kind of focus just on franchise law? When did that take place?
So what happened was I learned franchise sales law from working at St. Gregory. And then one of the partners said, hey, look, I see a void in the marketplace right now. There's nobody that's franchising indoor cycling. He said, let's create our own indoor cycling franchise. And so they created CycleBar. And so when we launched CycleBar, that's really where I learned franchise law because we hired the best legal minds out there, DLA Piper and Fisher Zucker, to help us draft the franchise disclosure document and draft the franchise agreement. And during that time, I got to ask a ton of questions. Why is it written this way that you have an exclusive territory, but the franchisor is allowed to compete against you? Why is that? And so I was asking a lot of questions to really understand franchise law, because they don't teach you this in law school. So when I was worked with them at running CycleBar, that's when I really learned franchising. So not only just writing franchise disclosure documents and franchise agreements, but actually implementing them. So when it came time to have actually locations open, I was taking the terms of the franchise agreement and applying them in real world situations. I was defaulting franchisees, suing franchisees. We were getting sued, and dealing with all aspects of franchise compliance. So that's really where I learned franchise law, was running the legal department for CycleBar.
And then at some point you said, hey, I'm going to start my own business and kind of follow my own entrepreneurial itch and kind of hang my own shingle. I mean, when did that take place?
Yeah, so CycleBar ended up getting bought out by private equity, and I thankfully survived. I was one of the only employees that was retained. All operations moved off to California, and then they went through another round of private equity. And I said, maybe I should look at maybe pursuing other opportunities out there.
Okay.
And so I still was solely working with CycleBar, and they then were morphed into Exponential Fitness. And when they went public, that's when I decided, now's the time to really launch my firm. And so I did when they essentially went public.
Yeah, that's really cool. And when you talk to people that are evaluating franchising as an option, it's kind of neat that you've taken that entrepreneurial leap yourself and kind of took this skill set and then applied it to your own kind of kit franchise law, which is cool. So you and I have kind of crossed paths because, the franchise disclosure document, which is the ubiquitous document in our industry that kind of governs the relationship between franchisee and franchisor. I wanted to kick this off by just asking you, in your words, what is an FDD? What is a franchise disclosure document for those that are kind of new to franchising and trying to figure this all out?
Sure. Well, first, I say it's a sales tool. The FTC would probably disagree with that somewhat, but the Federal Trade Commission, which is the organization that actually regulates franchising on a national scale, essentially, they require every franchisor to file this document called the franchise disclosure document that includes 23 items that describe the business, and it breaks it down into bite-sized chunks. And so every single franchisor that is franchising has to actually file one with various registration states and issue it in order to be able to sell franchises. And so the franchise disclosure document, though, when I'm reviewing it, I look at it as a sales tool, and I look at an opportunity for the franchisor to really explain themselves. Some FDDs are really just simple templates, and those that really doesn't explain a lot and tell me or tell the prospective franchisee candidate what you're buying when you buy the franchise. Yes, of course, you've got to talk about the laws that you've got to follow and your rules or rights and responsibilities, but they should be telling more of a story too at the same time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, that's a really good description. So, here's the elephant in the room. Do franchise candidates, people that are looking to become franchise owners, mostly for the first time and obviously for the second and third time as well if they reinvest, do they really need an attorney to review the FDD with them?
Absolutely. Yes, 100%.
I know what you were going to say, Kim.
Yeah, I know. But anytime you're investing significant amount of money and signing a 10-year agreement, 100%, yeah, absolutely. Hire an attorney to review this. And not just any attorney, but hire a franchise lawyer, somebody who knows franchise law, somebody who's experienced what franchisors do and what franchisees are looking for. That's critical when you hire an attorney. But when I first talk to my candidates or my clients, really, first thing I ask them is, have you read the FDD? And they may say, yeah, maybe the first couple pages, maybe 20 pages. Maybe I've read items 7 and 19. But, it's very rare for a candidate to say, oh, yeah, I've read it cover to cover. I completely understand every section. That's what I do. I review it with you and explain everything to you so you don't have to read 390 pages. Yeah.
And we'll get into that here in a moment in terms of your process. But in terms of, and couldn't agree more. Like having someone that is really knowledgeable about franchise law is very different than a general business attorney. So that's the advice I generally give anyone looking at, franchising, is find someone that knows this industry, that understands how it works, knows the intricacies, because that's going to be really valuable to you as you kind of get in there with a fine-tooth comb and understand what you're signing. So does a candidate need a franchise attorney that lives near them, or can they hire someone in any state? You mentioned before the registration states. Does that come into play here as it relates to, who they engage to review their FDD?
No. Most of my clients live outside of Ohio. I'm based in Cincinnati, Ohio. Occasionally I have a client that lives here, and that's always great because I'll go out and have a beer with them and get to know them better on a personal level. But no, my clients come from all over. Franchise law is multi-jurisdictional. And so, I'll have a candidate in California buying a franchise in Texas, and the franchisor is based out of Florida. Yes, I can work with you on that for sure.
Yeah, I definitely can relate, because that's the same thing. I'm in Virginia, but rarely do I work with Virginia candidates. They're all over the country, and a lot of times they're investing in areas that are not where they live. So let's get into your process. You mentioned that before. So someone is engaging your services for a review. Exactly, like, what do you do with them so that they're like fully educated on what they're getting into?
So first of all, I start off by asking them questions. We have an initial consultation that's always free. It's 15 to 30 minutes where I ask them basic questions. What do you do? Where are you? What do you like? Just getting to know them, and then asking questions about, what are you interested? What franchise are you looking at buying? Why did you narrow it down? Because most franchise candidates start off looking at maybe 5 brands, and then they narrow it down to 1. And I'll ask, what's the major selling point? Why did you choose this one particular franchise brand? And then right after that, I'll ask them, what are your fears and concerns about this? So I get a better understanding of what I need to look for when I'm doing the review. And so then the second part of this, it's a 3-part process. Second part is me doing my homework, where I'll go through the documents. That includes the franchise disclosure document, the franchise agreement, and the area development agreement if you're buying multiples. And so I'll go through those documents. I'll also go to the United States Patent and Trademark Office and look up their trademarks. I'll go to the state registry, and this is not the franchise registry. I'll go to the Secretary of State's website to make sure that company is a legitimate company. I'll go to Pacer to look up any lawsuits about them. And then I'll compile this information and present it to the candidate during an 1.5 hour FDD review call, where I share my screen, and they literally see me going through it cover to cover, showing areas that I like, areas that I don't like, areas that I have questions about, areas they should ask the franchisor about. And I have Zoom AI's note-taking feature enabled, so that you don't have to sit there and type like a stenographer and try to look at me, look at the documents, and figure out what I'm saying at the same time. The Zoom AI bot's really good at summarizing that information. So after the call's over, I send the highlighted version with my notes, as well as a summary of the call. And so it's really good ammo then to go back to the franchisor and say, well, this is what my attorney brought up. And it's good, topics for discussion. Hey, he had a concern about this. How would you like to address it? So it's really just getting a really good understanding of what you're buying.
Yeah. And then you said there was a third part to the process?
Oh, sorry. That's the third part. The analysis part is the third part.
Got it. Yeah. And, it sounds like common sense. Like when you are evaluating a franchise, you assume that the company's legitimate. You assume that everything they represent with their trademarks are, it's registered, it's not pending, and litigation, like it's supposed to be disclosed. So I'm sure, throughout your tenure, you've identified some disconnects between maybe what's in the document and what's reality.
Absolutely. It's typically, maybe it's a filing with the Secretary of State. Maybe they missed an annual filing. They didn't file, they didn't pay a fee. Well, if they didn't pay a fee, they're not considered a entity. I forget what the legal term is right now, but essentially you can't sign a legal contract with that business because they're a non-entity.
Right.
They've been suspended.
So it might give the buyer rescission rights in the future, or just create a problem between the parties if it's not done with the right, framework from the beginning.
Yeah, and some of those little administrative issues may, if you have a bunch of those, may indicate a larger problem. If I see a lot of, if they don't file on time, they're with the Secretary of State, what else aren't they filing on time?
It's a behavior issue, and it's a good thing for the candidate to at least understand going into the relationship. So that's a really valuable thing. So how much do you charge when you have a client that comes to you and wants to go through this process? They're evaluating a bunch of brands. They've narrowed it down to one. What do you charge for your time to kind of go through this process with them?
Sure. I charge a flat fee of $19.95, and that's for a single unit. So if you're buying one franchise, and then if you're buying additional territories with that one franchise unit, still $19.95. But if you're buying multiple franchise units, then that's $2,495. And that's the extra cost is because there's another document. There's a multi-unit development agreement or an area development agreement that I also have to review. But it's all flat fee. You don't have to pay me up front. I don't require retainer. Every single one of my clients has paid me. You just pay me after I do the review.
Very cool. So how long does it take to go through this process? What's the turnaround time, kind of soup to nuts?
I've done it legitimately. I've had people call me and say, look, hey, I'm going to Discovery Day. Today's Thursday. They'll say, oh, I'm going to Discovery Day tomorrow. Can you get this done right now? Well, I can't get it done right now. I need to actually do my review. But you give me 5 hours and we'll schedule one tonight at 10 o'clock. So I've actually done same day. But typically it's next day or 3 days, but some of my clients will schedule me out, a month and a half in advance. But typically everything should be resolved. That is from the initial contact with me to actually having the review finished is less than a week.
Okay. So I know a lot of this, we've been focusing on new development. Someone's coming in and they're starting up their franchise. They're taking this existing proven model. They're going to launch it in their market. But the resale side of things, I'm pretty active in the resale market. And these are obviously franchise owners that are looking to exit and, franchise buyers that are looking to come in and hit the ground running with cash flow. So what services do you offer to those that are selling their franchise or those that are looking to buy an existing, up and running franchise operation?
Sure. So I can help with pretty much everything when it comes to buying a resale or selling an open location. So drafting the LOI, the letter of intent, the asset purchase agreement. Dealing with landlords is sometimes the most tricky aspect of an asset purchase agreement because you have to get the landlord's consent and you don't know when to bring the landlord in. And typically they're going to want the original tenant to stay on the guarantee and all this stuff. But that's probably what takes up most of the time. But I provide everything with the resale. So anything you need a lawyer for, I can do. Negotiating back and forth. I like my clients to actually have a set price that they've already discussed with the seller or buyer so that I don't have to get involved in that. I don't want to go back and forth because it's somewhat of a waste of your money. Go, figure out what you want to buy this location for, what you want to sell it for, and then come to me and I'll tell you, go do this, do the negotiations, set a price, and then I can put that into my asset purchase agreement and we can go from there.
Interesting. So is there a certain, I know everyone looks at item 7, so they can look at the startup cost of the total project size. They look at item 19 because they want to see financial performance representations. What are some of the overlooked items or item in the FDD in your view?
So item 13, trademarks. When you buy a franchise, you're buying the marks, the trademarks, and the system. And so when you go, I'll go to the United States Patent and Trademark Office and verify that the trademarks they own are the trademarks they say they do. And sometimes I'll find that a different entity, in fact, owns the trademark. And that's a kind of a red flag there. But most of the time, they've got the correct information on there. But what I find, though, when I do go to the United States Patent and Trademark Office after looking at item 13, is that sometimes you'll find franchisors are launching a new product or service that they haven't talked about yet. However, they've filed a trademark for it. And so you can see, all right, well, maybe they're going to be launching this new product called X. And so they file a trademark for it, and I can go in and see that and talk to you about it. And then you can bring it to the franchisor and say, oh, what are you planning on doing, in the future? And it's just another point of discussion.
Yeah, look, data matters. You want to have every data point before you make this really big decision, legal decision, time decision, financial decision. So every little piece, like something that emerges there, it could be a game changer for a candidate, whether good or bad. So, so what advice would you give to people that are searching for franchises to buy?
First of all, hire a consultant like yourself.
Thanks for the plug, Kit.
Yeah, no, seriously though. I mean, it really matters. I've had situations a few times where my client will go outside of the consultant's recommendations, and they'll go and they'll do a Google search for a similar brand. So let's say you recommend a yoga brand of some sort.
Right.
Well, then they may go off and do a Google search and find a yoga brand that they think is better. Boy, when they do that, I mean, the results are not pretty when I do the review, because these businesses haven't been vetted yet.
Yep. Yeah, it could be a coin toss. I mean, yeah, they could strike gold, but the reality is somebody with experience, whether it's a consultant, a coach, broker, somebody probably has more information about that chain that should be discussed with them. And it's hard to get that when it's just information that the system pushes out on the internet, which of course is all going to look great.
Yeah. And I typically find when I ask my clients, look, how did you decide on this brand? Were you really thinking when you first started the search that you'd end up finding a brand like this? And they'll say, no, I was originally looking in this niche. And, but, thanks to Mike, I found this brand, and this is something I never thought in a million years I'd want to do this, but here we are, and that's what's exciting.
Well, it's funny. One of the first placements I made when I became a full-time consultant many moons ago was a candidate that had a bunch of young children, and he wanted an after-school education franchise. And he ended up investing in an equipment business, which was very much unrelated to child education. It was more repairing equipment in gyms, which I know you have a lot of background in that. So I just thought that was interesting. And it kind of opened my eyes to, hey, there's a lot out there. And if you just have the blinders on and you're narrowly focused, you're not going to see what other matches could be out there that could be a great fit for you and your family. So question for you, Kid. So if a franchisee has a dispute with a franchisor, are you the first person they call?
No, I tell them, look, call the franchisor. I think part of my job is really explaining the relationship. And I think a lot of clients of mine enter into the relationship thinking that the franchisor is an adversary. It's like Dr. Moriarty, and it really is not supposed to be that way. It's a symbiotic relationship. Don't look at the franchisor as this evil person that's going to, they can change and manipulate things. And just because the franchise agreement is written the way it is, which is more one-sided in the franchisor's favor, but it makes sense to have that way, because the franchise document, the franchise agreement, has to control the relationship of franchisees throughout the country for 10 years, typically. Yeah. And so it has to be written in a way that allows for the franchisor to make changes and modifications to deal with market conditions or competitors. And so the relationship, the franchisee understands, look, hey, this isn't the big bad wolf and we should be partners. Then they'll realize, oh yeah, you know what? I shouldn't have to call my lawyer when there's a little problem. Call the franchisor, work it out. If you can't work it out, then call me. And then
that's really good advice. Really good advice, because having those conversations can get things fixed pretty quick, as opposed to like going right to the lawyers. And I think that's really, really strong advice. So let me ask you this. Do you see similarities between kind of the franchise agreement and the relationship between the franchisee and the franchisor similar to a lease agreement between the landlord and the tenant? I know they're very different in that a franchise is a lot more complex with systems, but in terms of how they're written, I use that as an analogy sometimes with my candidates, because, a lease is really written for the most part to protect the property and the landlord. Whereas, the franchise agreement is written to protect the system and is going to definitely skew towards the franchisor. Is that something you ever talk through with a candidate just so they can kind of see somewhat apples to apples there?
Yeah. So when I go through my review, I explain, look, the franchisor is not going to make money unless you do, and so, I think with your analogy, maybe it's, the landlord's not going to make money if they don't have a tenant. If they've got a tenant that's not paying rent, they're not going to survive. So they need to have these tenants, and the rent has to be a good rent rate. Otherwise, they're going to be overpriced and they're going to go out of business and you're going to lose a tenant. So I think maybe that's, I haven't listened to your explanation of that relationship, but, the franchisor-franchisee relationship should be more symbiotic and more of a business partnership than anything.
Yeah, and I think to your point, it's the same thing when the franchisor kind of constructs their royalty rates and the marketing rates and everything. It has to be something where they get compensated for their time and efforts, but it can't be cost prohibitive where it doesn't allow the franchisee to earn. And that's just all part of validation and talking to owners and all that. So this was an awesome, Kit. I really appreciate your time and kind of sharing all this information with us about the franchise disclosure document. And all things franchise law. Anything else you want to add to the mix before we wrap up today?
No, just thank you very much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if anyone listening would like to connect with Kit to discuss franchise law or franchise document review, contact me at franchiseqb.com or on Twitter at QBFranchiseQB. I'll get you guys connected with him and his team. Thank you, Kit, so much for taking the time to get in the huddle and speak with us about Kit franchise law.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
You got it. Thank you for listening to the Franchise QB podcast, where you're at the helm of your future as a franchise owner. If you enjoyed the content, please rate the show and recommend it to anyone that might be interested in franchising. Make sure to visit franchiseqb.com to subscribe to my newsletter and for an actionable playbook to go from walk-on to legend in your new business. Follow us on Twitter at QBFranchiseQB and join us every week for a new episode. See you next time.
Visit franchiseqb.com. to take the next step of your journey towards wealth, independence, and franchise ownership. And remember, when working for the man gets old, you must do something bold. Thank you for listening.